that we have all ages of young adults with us.
Yeah.
Some of us never outgrow our children. And my wife has a saying that I like, and that is that we're all God's children. God doesn't have grandchildren. Yeah. You know, God relates to all of us. And in church, we need to have a comfortable understanding of how we family each other. And one thing that we have tried to learn across the years, because family is also culturally intensive. What that means is we family the way that we've been familied. We parent the way we've been parented. And when we change cultures and we come into a Western world that has different values, it creates a kind of a clash, a cultural clash of values, because where we live does not often agree with who we are. And it stirs up conflict. So, you know, we understand that we have challenges, but we're here to just talk under God's leadership with each other. And so that we can learn, but we can also grow. And then we can change what works for us within God's economy, God's way of working.
I think there's another piece to culture, because church is a culture, agree? And for some reason or the other, I don't know who started this story, somebody said church should be quiet. But if you read Revelation, we talked about far beyond the sun this morning, right? In 3 different languages. So even I could participate because I'm linguistically challenged. If you read in Revelation, it talks about a number that no man can number. So far, you all with me? And it talks about streets of gold, right? And it talks about crowns, right? And in Revelation it says this number that no man can number is going to cast crowns at the feet of Jesus. You don't think that's going to make noise?
If you can visualize and use your imagination of people taking their crowns and casting them down on the ground, it's going to make some noises.
On golden streets.
Golden streets.
On a number, such a number that there is no number for it, that's a lot of people. And anytime you get that many people in one place, it gets noisy. Just because they are. So I don't know, and that's to be an act of worship. So I don't know if maybe we need to kind of rethink about worship and quiet. Because maybe we have the wrong concept of what worship actually is. I don't know, you're the pastor, you're talking.
Well, I think one of the things we're going to talk about first, before we even talk about worship, because worship is where we all get together at church. We come out of our homes and we come into relationship with each other. So we all bring our presets with us of what worship. I know one thing, you've got the church peace and quiet. Quiet and awe. Because they intentionally set up things so that you're awed into silence. Only the priest talks or makes any noise. Everyone else must be quiet, and that's the way they get authority and respect. And a lot of our culture of worship comes out of that Catholic environment. And even when we become Protestants, of course, the further away you come from that, the noisier it gets, right? When you get into some types of worships. But rather than talk about worship, let's talk about family first, because that's really what it's all about. Families are sitting here.
Okay. This was announced as a seminar. So, you know, usually seminars have projectors and PowerPoints. This is kind of the after-dinner discussion. That's why we're sitting here, because we wanted it to be informal. And as far as parenting goes, we're not experts, because experts are has-beens under pressure, and that's not us. We can only tell you that we have raised adult children who no longer live in our house. And for that, I think we are successful. And thank goodness they're not here, so you can't ask them how successful we were. But we can only tell you some of the things we learned along the way, and some things we think have value when you think about what it means to parent. And I'm going to put in my disclaimer now. I am very thankful that we are not raising children today.
In fact, our daughter wanted us to. She came to us and said, I'd like for you to take my son, and I want you to raise him like you raised us. And we said, but we're grandparents. Grandparents should not be raising children. Parents should be raising children. And there's a truth to that. Because even my wife, who is an only child with 2 children in her family, her mother and dad had 2 children, 2 only children.
True.
Because they were how many years apart?
12 and a half years apart.
12 and a half years apart. They're both born on 13s. And I started telling you, it must have been Friday the 13th. But,
it was a Wednesday, thank you very much.
But her mother said, very simply and very straightforward, when Wilma asked, how come her sister got raised different than her? And her mother said,
you get more lenient as you get older.
yeah. And you get wiser when you get older. There's some things you do as a parent of that first child that after several children or the next child doesn't get treated the same way. Things change.
Because you want to be the perfect parent with child number 1, and then reality sets in and you realize that's not possible.
So we know it's a fluid thing, and we're going to have to understand why we have that fluidity and how we can respond to it. And you have to make choices yourselves, for yourselves as parents, because there is not a perfect parenting mold, because we're not all the same. There are principles, but there's not just the same way that everybody ought to be parented.
And the other thing we know with a surety is that even if you have identical twins, they're not alike. There are no twins here, are there? But someone could raise it up and say, oh yeah, I've had 2 just alike. But not in temperament.
I don't know if you remember when we shared with you about the sacred circle, because that's one of the things that we want to talk about first, because we need to set some things into a relational mold of how we grow our family and how we respect family in our homes. It's important to know. Oh, we don't have to trade anymore?
Whoa, now I'm powerful.
Now you give her control. I had control before.
Hallelujah.
Where is the yellow card?
Oh, the floor. He's asking about the floor. We didn't bring the floor with us. Believe me, we got a floor at home. But we have to understand that God set things into place from the beginning. And we need to review that. There are principles of relationship that God established. And one relationship that is firm is that God is in charge. It's God's power. He needs to have it his way because he created family. He created husband and wife to be family and set some things in place. Now, the first thing that he said is that we see and we read in the spirit of prophecy is that he came down and walked and talked with Adam in the garden. That they all referred all of their needs and all of their growth to him. And he is the one who fed them instructions and gave them the whys and the wherefores and how-tos. But he gave them dominion. God gave man and woman dominion. And that's a very important factor and principle of being in charge of family.
And maybe we need to stop and talk about male and female and dominion, because I think that certainly in the culture of the church, women aren't considered equals.
Well, that's because the culture of the church is not too different than the culture of the world, except that we bring the Bible in order to enforce man's superiority. How many husbands here feel that you're superior?
They're not putting up their hands.
You have learned. You have learned that you're not superior.
Let's put us back in our place if we raise our hand.
You have learned because all you have to do is live together for a little while and you find out that women are very powerful. And they have a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills and ability. So we know, men, we're not superior, so we will often take advantage of anything that will give us the edge and become the authority. Well, God said that man should be the head. That's right. What does that head look like? When you look into chapter 2 and 3, as they leave the Garden of Eden, that is when God said, in sin, somebody's got to take the accountability. Now, being accountable and being the boss are two different things. Usually the boss, the buck stops there. And if anybody gets blamed for wrong, who gets blamed? The boss. So if you want to be the boss of your family, you have to take all the blame for everything that goes wrong. God gave man accountability. He said, yes, I expect for you to be the one to set things in place according to God's plan. Someone in sin has to take the lead. And the husband was supposed to be the priest and the leader of the family. However, what happens when the priest does not act like a priest?
There better be a priestess.
Yes, someone has got to move in place to respond to God. So God never told man that he was better or that the woman was not as good. Because when he created them, he created man and woman, and they were equal. They were different, but they were equal under God, and they gave them both dominion.
And if I understand Genesis correctly, the Hebrew word for helpmeet means completer. So that means that she definitely is not like he, because she has something he doesn't have.
That's right. And we're not just talking about physiology. Physiology and anatomy, yeah, you can see the difference. And that's why the two can come together and be one. But also, there must be a spiritual completer. There must be an emotional completer. And that means that when we bring our temperaments and personalities together, that you're not identical. So my wife often says about me to the children, you ought to be glad that, you know, you've got a mother and a father.
You were supposed to tell that part.
Because if it was up to me, I wouldn't always do things like he does. And so when you have two...
No, that's not what I used to say.
Okay.
I used to tell my children that they needed to pray that if they only had a single parent, it would be their father and not me.
Isn't that awfully giving of her? That's nice of her.
No, because they'd be in better shape with him as the single parent than me.
But at the same time, we also know that she never intends not to be there. She always intends to be there. But it does take two personalities and temperaments. But they must come together as one under God. So that's the first rule when we talk about the sacred circle. It's God and husband and wife, or mom and dad. All things must come out of that threesome that's the head of the family. It's God plus dad and mom.
And then when we move out of that close circle, we find the next part of the boundary are children. And we live in a very child-focused society. Have you noticed that? Watch TV commercials. Who are they geared to? Go to the grocery store. Where are things on the shelf? Well, yeah, where you pay. But also, if you drive your cart down aisles, kids can reach out and get stuff because it's put there at their level. And if you listen to all the things that go on and people who talk to you, they try to convince you that your children are in charge.
Or at least you need to do things according to what your children want.
And that you want to make your children happy. They're children. They really shouldn't be happy with you as a parent until they're grown and they have their own children, because then they get it.
Yeah, because you can't be a pleaser of children. You are a parent. And a parent must disciple children. Or, what's the other word? Discipline? It comes out of the same word, doesn't it? Disciple, discipline. Is there a difference? Not really. Because to discipline means that you help your children learn how to behave.
And the goal of a parent, the real goal of a Christian parent, is to set their children free to be their own individuals, not what parents dream that they didn't get to do. But also, part of that means that you set children free to make their own spiritual choices, but also to direct themselves in their lives. Because in all honesty, and I know part of this is cultural, and that there are a lot of cultures where families of multi-generations live together, but in this country, we're not set up to live like that. So we need to launch them so that they leave and they don't come back.
Well, evidently God intended something, because in chapter 2 of Genesis, he says, when you leave your parents, you cleave unto whom? Your wife, or your husband.
Or your husband, your spouse.
You cleave to your spouse. So God never intended for a child to have multiple levels of mothers. One mom, one dad. One person in charge, who's the dad, one person in charge is the mom. Not mama this and mama that and mama the other, or daddy this or daddy that the other. You don't have all different kinds of dads and moms. You know? God says, I want you to set up rule in your house under one headship of God, mother and father. And then in that outer circle, the next circle, and we have here, I think we shared it before with you, is children. And there's a boundary between children and parents. And it's important that we understand that the reason that boundary is there is that parents are in charge, under God's dominion, of how the family is developed.
And if any of you are adults and live at home with your parent, or have spent some time as an adult living in the house with your parent, you know, it's always a challenge, because parents, my mother, whom you've all met, who turned 90 last year, still refers to me as her child. I'm the parent of her adult grandchildren, who've made her a great grandmother, but she finds it very difficult to separate the fact that I am no longer her little girl. Because as long as, you know, and well, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but at our house, our rule was that if you live under our roof, you have to abide by our rules.
Amen. Amen.
But that's what God sets up when he sets mom and dad in charge. As long as there's a family there, mom and dad are the head. They get to come out and set the rules. They get to come out and set the boundaries for behaviors in the family under God. But there is also, as my wife shared, we are to nurture and discipline children until they can become self-disciplined. That's your ultimate goal, is for your children to be self-disciplined. Now, they can't do that without the guidance and the discipline that the parents set in place for them, so that they, when they become self-disciplined, are able to make decisions of safety and of good faith decisions for themselves. Then they can go out and make up their own home by becoming parents or husbands and wives together.
And of course, the other challenge comes. I'm learning this lesson. Our grandson is three today. That when you have, if you don't respect boundaries, then there are always the challenges about whose rules grandchildren, who are now children of your children, are going to follow. And so that's why God set all this in place, because he already knew that, I don't know about guys, I can only speak about women, but a house can't have but one queen.
Whoa. Now, they used to express that here in this country by saying, how many cooks in one kitchen? One cook in the kitchen, right?
Amen.
Only one cook in the kitchen.
And that's the truth.
Now, you all know that when you get things together in the kitchen in here, somebody has to be the head cook that everyone defers to, right? Or else there is chaos, right? And that's true about family. The same thing is true about family. When there's a mother, God gives mothers instinctively and spiritually intuition. You've heard that word, intuition? They're intuitive. It gets built into them by being raised by other women and feeling things, not just knowing the rule, but also feeling what's happening around them. That's why mothers are such valuable people, because there are some men, most men, who are not very intuitive. If they didn't learn it in a book, or if they weren't taught by somebody, they don't ever get it. And there are some men who are like that. There's some men who are more intuitive, and we sort of look at them cross-eyed, you know, because they're more feely-touchy about things. You know what I'm talking about? And we don't recognize that among men. Men are supposed to be strong, and they're supposed to have hands on, and they're supposed to fix everything. They're not supposed to feel stuff.
But see, that's a problem when a man gets married, because a woman doesn't want a fixer.
Sometimes.
Most times, unless he's fixing the car.
That's right. Outside.
The
Or the
door,
dishwasher.
or the hinges.
Yeah.
He can fix those things, but he can't fix relationships.
Yeah, don't fix me.
There you go.
But I think the main thing that we really want to do now is talk about what helps us to understand, as families grow and develop, how we can be better parents. Because that's really the challenge that we all have.
And I think it's real simple. How many of you have done the well baby checkup who are parents? You've been to the pediatrician or the doctor, and what do they look at? Immunization record. What else?
The growth chart.
Height, weight, growth chart. What else? What other kind of expectations do they have?
Developmental milestone.
Ah, now what does that mean in plain English? What's a developmental milestone?
Can they talk? Can they?
Can they talk? Can they roll over? Do they respond when you look at them? All of those things are a part of development. Did you know there's a spiritual developmental milestone as well?
Yeah. It's called faith. And are you aware that there is a process of faith development while there's also physical and emotional and cognitive development? See, and those are the things that must go hand in hand with a Christian family. Whereas they might teach you about development in a social context or cognitive context or emotional. But at the same time, a Christian family must also understand the times for developing the faith of the child.
But even before we get there, then we're back to talking about where you started this conversation, Pastor Ansel, church. Now, I have to admit, I'm grandmother. My new name is Go-Go. So when my grandson comes to visit and you all hear him calling Go-Go, you know he's calling me. That's the differentiation between me and my mother, who is grandmommy. You know, you can't confuse a toddler with two grandmothers. What?
It's also the resistance of somebody I know who doesn't want to be called grandmother.
And what is your name?
Papa.
See, he's not grandpa. So why should I be grandma? Anyway, the reality is that babies make noise. And developmentally, it's appropriate. Because we want babies to babble. We want them to do something when we talk to them.
But not in church.
Why not? We sing happy songs and we do things, they're participating.
Oh, like I saw a child up on there today during the singing of the song. She was just all over the place. She was doing a holy dance.
Yes, she was. You saw that.
Yes, I saw that. I thought it was delightful. Because she was engaged with the music and engaged with the joyfulness and the praise. But at her level and her age, that was completely appropriate.
Amen.
She was live with Jesus. Okay? Now don't you adults try that, because we might put you out.
I can't do a holy day?
Well, you can, but there are consequences.
See, because today was one of those days I sat in my seat, but I was dancing in my head because we had a family experience yesterday that was worth praising and dancing about.
Yeah.
But when we start looking at, and we don't think about that, well, those of us who had children a long time ago, does anybody, maybe this is an American thing. Anybody ever heard children should be seen and not heard? Oh, it is an American thing. Not a good idea.
Yeah, we were taught that when we were young. They were actually say that out loud to people. Children ought to be seen, but not heard. I can see you, but I don't want to hear you. You're going to pretend like you're not there. Isn't that terrible? But that's the way some of us were raised up at a certain time in our lives as young ones. And that's what we were told.
You don't exist.
You don't exist.
It's almost like you don't exist. Like you have no person. You're not a full person. So.
And children are not miniature adults, contrary to what some of the more seasoned people would like to believe. They are growing, developing people.
You can dress them in suits and ties, but don't expect them to act like a man.
Don't expect the suit and tie to last very long
That's
either,
right.
because it's going.
For too long.
But see, when we realize this, then we then have to think about where does this fit across the spectrum? And I think that media has done us a big disservice, because there used to be a time when children were told to go outside and play. They burned off a lot of energy, which they had, which was another reason why I told my daughter I couldn't do a baby again. I don't have that much energy. I'm tired. But the reality is that children need to do that. Their work is play. If you leave children alone and you just watch what they do, left to their own devices, they will play out a whole lot of stuff. I remember at one point our children were away at school. I think they were in academy. And I used to go in their room and stand and cry because I really wasn't ready for them to go. So I decided I would go down in the children's division and teach Sabbath school. That was the most enlightening time I've ever had. I taught kindergartners. I knew so much about people's homes. Because children will tell you.
They have no inhibitions.
I remember one Sabbath, a little boy saying to me, I used to give out stickers to my children who knew their memory verse on Sabbath. And one of my little students looked at me very pitifully because he didn't get a sticker. He didn't know his memory verse. And he said, my mama says she doesn't have time to teach me my Sabbath school lesson. And I did a double take because coming out of the parents' mouth was, we need to be concerned about our young people. We're losing them. And I'm thinking, but you got one at your house.
You don't have time for it.
So when we start looking at development and what happens, we have to be consistent. I think if we look in the Bible, I'm always reminded of Naaman's maiden girl. She doesn't have a name. First of all, I like her because she's a girl. Second of all, I like her because she was powerful. She couldn't have been any more than 9. And yet and still she had been taken as a servant. She'd gone to a foreign country. And she apparently worked well enough that when she said to Naaman's wife, I know somebody who can help your husband, she had credibility. Now, how many 9-year-olds do you know that could be away from home, be responsible enough that when they tell somebody, I know somewhere where you can go and get some help, somebody would believe them? A powerful man? So somewhere in the home that she grew up in, parents had begun the process of discipline so that by the time she was 9 and now a captive, she was self-disciplined.
So that's saying a whole lot, isn't it? Yeah. And that, I think all of us want to have families and relationships with children that grow and develop at a level that you can, that what you see is what you would call advancing and developing and growing through God's grace into what they're going to become. And that's where the church also participates. That's why we have children's ministries. And children's ministries leaders are taken through curriculum in order for them to understand how they assist. They don't take over the job from parents. They only are partners in the ministry to the children. Parents must have an active role. So it is important for families to understand and parents to understand. So we're going to share some things with those who might benefit, and we're going to pass these around. These should go one to each family, okay? And if you would share that so that we can talk about, leave one up here please, so we can refer to them also by color as well.
But there's a quote. You know, we like to bring out spirit of prophecy. Well, I have a quote that I think is powerful, and it's out of Testimonies, Volume 1, pages 388 and 389. And this is the quote, and I think this applies to all of us because we are church family. It says, if Christ dealt with us as we often deal with one another and with our children, we would stumble and fall through utter discouragement. I saw that Jesus knows our infirmities and has himself shared our experience in all things but in sin. Therefore, he has prepared for us a path suited to our strength and capacity, and like Jacob has marched softly and in evenness with the children as they were able to endure, that he might entertain us by the comfort of his company and be to us a perpetual guide. He does not despise, neglect, or leave behind the children of the flock. He has not bidden us move forward and leave them. He has not traveled so hastily as to leave us with our children behind. Oh no, but he has even the path to life, even for children, and parents are required in his name to lead them along the narrow way. God has appointed us a path suited to the strength and capacity of children.
Now, we can leave some of these so they can be duplicated, and it needs to be placed in your hands so that you can go through it and apply it to yourselves as families working with children. God wants us to be students of the Word, but we should also be students of our children. We should know our children. We should understand where they are, what they're doing, how they're developing, how they're growing, and be willing to guide them through that process. And the church should come alongside of us in family ministry and in children's ministry and be there to support that and to make sure that parents with their children feel comfortable in the church.
You mean they should be family friendly?
They should be family friendly. And I told the pastor this morning that we would like to bring at some point and show this to our church leaders. It's a little thing called Family Friendly Church. It's a video. And it will help you to have a discussion as a church of what you would like your church to look like to families who have children, so they can choose to be here and know this is a good place to grow children for Jesus Christ.
It's like, for example, like Metropolitan Church came from a non-children church to now a lot of children.
Yeah. Which is healthy.
As I know. I mean, how many kids were here before?
4 or 5.
Yes, your
4 or 5?
11. No, 11.
And now how many we have in the children's division?
30.
About 30 something? Oh,
Wow.
that's a whole lot. But see, if you're going to be a church like that, then it's important that the families of the church know that they're welcomed with their children and that there's a place for them to grow as parents, while the children grow as children beside them and within those families. And that we're here to cultivate a safe place for them to receive that guidance and nurturance and still feel like it's God's plan. And a lot of times, there's a conflict because older people have one picture of what church ought to be. And parents with children are struggling trying to fit into the older people's church.
Well,
And-
sometimes the older people are their parents.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you get this conversation from your parent about how you need to make your children behave in a certain way because after all, that's how they raised you.
That's right. So, and, you know, and we can talk about this till the cows come home. We all grow differently and we all have different experiences that we bring about church to church and also to our families. But the one thing we want you to know is that it ought to be a wide open discussion that includes families with their children. Because those families want to feel like they're doing that which is acceptable and right in the church. So if we put standards there and rules that are uncomfortable and don't fit how they're raising their children, then they're going to feel uncomfortable and won't always want to be there. Or families coming in with more children will not feel safe in the environment. So how do you have a reverent church service.
Well, maybe you start with definition.
Yeah.
What's reverence?
What's reverence? And how is that defined? What does it look like? So those are discussions that you have, but sometimes it helps to be reminded that some of us were once young. Even parents of little children. Sometimes we forget what we were like and how we were raised at that time, because some of us did not come into cognition until we were adolescents almost. We forgot about our little children's stage of growing up. Some of us didn't, but some of us do. So I think it's good to go through here and just give us some brief guidance as to how to understand the developmental stages that children go through with their parents.
Well, I think where we begin, you said that you started this church and there were there were 10 or less children, and now there are 35. What are the age groups? From 0 to 13, okay? So, and what I see, now nobody asked for an announcement, but what I see on Sabbath at children's story time is you have a lot of children between 12 months and 5. That's a lot. And if those of you who are parents look at this chart, what do you find children doing that might be a challenge at church? In that age group between 12 months and 5, what are some of the things you see that might be a problem in church?
They act more independent.
Yeah, they act more independent. The tantalizing twos.
Act silly and boisterous, may use shocking language.
And how old is that?
3.5, 5.
See?
That next stage, yeah.
So if you're looking at this, what's realistic? And I'm going to be honest with you. I love Metropolitan. I go everywhere and tell everybody I belong to Metropolitan. It's a damn church. And when you come to Houston, I'm out recruiting people, okay? But let me tell you, these chairs aren't wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'm an adult, so my feet touch the floor. What do these chairs feel like to a 2 or 3-year-old? So
where is the most comfortable place? Where's the most comfortable place for children who are 12 to 4 or 5? Where's the most comfortable place? The floor. So it's no surprise that they will spend their time during a church service on the floor.
And unfortunately, in some churches they have pews, so, you see this child start at the front and they made their way all the way to the back under the pew. You can't do that here because these chairs
don't lend themselves to that.
And they're set very close together. And if you're like me, you brought stuff to church, so you got stuff on the floor.
So I think the thing we want to talk about very simply is the challenge for parents who bring children to church who feel uncomfortable with either going out or staying in. They're neither fish nor fowl. It just doesn't feel always good or acceptable. What were you going to say?
So is that okay to move all of them to the back?
My opinion as a pastor is that parents who find themselves having to go out often with children ought to sit somewhere toward the back of the church so they can inconspicuously take care of those things in and out. And not because they are assigned there. They just may feel more comfortable not sitting in the front rows having to get up with their child going back and forth, going out. So I would never assign them there. But if they feel more comfortable along the edges or in the back, then you'd rather have them in the church than not in the church. So wherever they might find it. But I don't think parents ought to be told where to sit in church, because they have just as much a right to a spiritual experience at church as anybody else. And because they have a child that brings on certain responsibilities, I don't think we ought to place them into a child care box that assigns them to a place that may not be their comfort level to engage in worship.
I'm just going to tell you about my experience. I had the blessing of being able to be at home with our children when they were small.
Poor, but at home.
But it was a blessing in retrospect. Of course, then I thought I was going to lose my mind, because I wanted to talk to an adult person.
Yes.
And I did not want to hear "but why" one more time. But the reality was, when I got to church, because we belonged to a church at that time that had roles for pastors' wives, and so when I showed up at church, they said that I should go to the children's division. And I told them I ran the children's division all week long at home. And I needed to sit in an adult Sabbath school class, and I was not going. Well, I wasn't probably one of the best loved pastors' wives, because I just said no.
She does not fit the normal pastor's wife format or model.
And they didn't figure that out. Look at my head. But anyway, the reality was I needed an adult Sabbath school class, and my children needed a break. So, you know, we hit the door, and they went to Sabbath school, and I went to my class, and I felt good. Now, that was my Sabbath blessing. That was once a week I got to interact with adults. But the thing that I found very interesting was that one Sabbath, my husband was standing at the door with our 2-year-old, I guess she was about 2, in his arms, and our church members were affronted that the pastor didn't give them their full attention. How can he stand there shaking hands with his child in his arm? So I think that we have some difficulties in figuring out where children belong in the run of things. But one of the things that I found most powerful, my husband told you this morning, we spent 4.5 weeks in East Africa. I don't know what we brought to them, but I know that they brought a lot to me as a part of having the privilege of sharing ministry there. And one Sabbath we were in Burundi. Look it up on the map. It's a landlocked country in East Africa, and they had a church that was probably half the size, maybe?
Maybe about half the size.
Half the size, and the windows had open air, and they sat on benches.
No backs.
They had more children than you did. They sat on the floor in front of the pulpit from Sabbath school until the end of church. I didn't see one child get up and go to the bathroom. I didn't see one child. They sat there and paid attention on little mats. I was fascinated. Now, mind you, the president of the mission asked my husband if they should invite the children out, because they again felt that there was a place for children. And my husband said, no, let them stay. If they want to stay, let them stay. They sat through the entire church service. I was fascinated. I haven't been anywhere else where I have not seen children, at least one child, have to go to the bathroom. I guess they have weak kidneys.
Well, not only that. You know how children sit during children's story? We're talking about 900 people almost jammed into a building a little bit smaller than this. And the children were on the floor next to each other in the same way they are front to back, side to side in children's stories. And there had to be about 50 to 75 of those children sitting up there. And they were attentive, because before, with the adults in, the children were all outside looking in the windows, wondering what was going on inside, that they couldn't come in. So when they were all invited in, they were happy to be there and thrilled. So what we were seeing is something was happening at home and at their churches normally, that no special behavior rules had to be passed out when they were brought into church. Now I want you to think about that, because I'm not saying that you must replicate that, but I'm saying that the home establishes what happens at church. And there must be some responsibility and accountability for understanding who children are and how they grow and develop and what you can expect to them of them at a certain age. Now I have to admit, there were no children up there between the ages of 1 and 3.
No.
They were with parents. Okay? They were with parents. But above 3, like 4 to 5 and on up, they were up there sitting next to each other in very close proximity. I mean, they were skin to skin up there for a long period of time while church was going on. So something was happening that helped those children to be self-disciplined when they got to church. Now, I would dare say that all of you want to see that same thing in your children. They love church, they love to be there, but they also, when they reach that age of about 5, 6, and 7, they know how to conduct themselves in church. But up until that time, what happens to parents and children of the younger ages that feeds and nurtures them to the point that when they get older, they're attentive and upfront and in a very personal and reverent way. Something has happened in the home, something has happened in their development that helps them appreciate and value church. So, I'm just hoping that you're hearing what we're saying, not that you have to replicate that culture, but ought to be interested and engaged enough to know how I can help my child.
One of the things, and I was still doing this when my husband pastored at Berea, and I didn't have any young children. I had a Sabbath day. It only came out for Sabbath. So there were things in the bag, and soon, all the little children soon learned that if you go sit by Auntie Wilma, she has a bag with goodies, and they were all quiet things. But, you know, we talk about Sabbath being special. Well, it shouldn't be special because we've come to church and children have sat all day. And I want to affirm all of you parents who have youngsters who are in here, they've been quiet the whole time. So you're doing something right. But if Sabbath is special and it's a delight, why aren't there some things that only come out on Sabbath? And they don't have to be techie things. You know, everybody doesn't own an iPad. Even though our church has created things for parents who are blessed enough to own an iPad, they have created things for your children to do in church that are quiet on your iPad for free.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, I have a question. This will be a good answer to everybody. I wonder how God feels of our worship here with our kids. Personally, sometimes I feel like embarrassed. My boy is almost 3 and a half, and he's very active. It's hard to control him, and I have to go up and down, in and out. I try to do the best I can. And I tell my wife, all you do is pray. I said, I can't just fight for anything. And then his mentality will be going that I'm a terrible father. And so, in church, Even in the morning when we sleep with me, we're going home, I said, we're going to church. I want you to be quiet. I want you to be the best you can, do the best you can. I feel sometimes that he doesn't understand. But I gotta say it to him. I have to say it to him, so somehow part of his little brain will fit that he has to be. But at the same time, I'm glad I'm hearing what you're saying. Maybe that's the part of the culture, the way that I was raised. And I can't expect him to be what I was. You know, I didn't grow in church. Out of church all the time. Came to church when I was 26, 27 years old. But yeah, sometimes I feel like, is it worthy our worship to God when we have less noise or more noise from our children? I don't know how many of them feel the same way as me.
Well, I think there's another piece to that. We can't expect our children to do something at church that they never do at home. If they are not, if you don't have, and if you're having family worship and it's an hour and you've got an 18-month-old, it's too long. You've got to make your worship developmentally. They're not paying you any attention. They're all, and you know what happens by the time they get to be old enough to know how to play the game. You know, we adults, we know how to play the game. We can put on the mask and do whatever is appropriate just to get you off our backs. They've learned how to do that, but they've gone to all the pretty places in their head while they're sitting there. They're like, I would hope this is soon going to be over because I need to be out of here. Yeah, there you go. So the reality is, if there is never a point during the week before you get to church where your children don't have to sit and quietly entertain themselves, don't expect them to do it at church.
And that's kind of a challenge. So the few times that we do get to actually have a family worship, which is with our schedules, it's just not possible. So that's fine.
And how old is she?
She's almost 3, 2.5, 2.5.
Age appropriate.
She wants her space with daddy.
So they're fighting.
Yes.
They're fighting about who's gonna be with daddy.
They don't share at that age.
It's like you're trying to read the Sabbath school lesson, and then that little one is running around, and the older one's paying attention, and then you just get frustrated because no one's listening.
Yeah, that's real.
And then it's like, what's the point? Why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think, because like I would like to teach them to sit still, but it's like you're going to spank them during worship, and then they're going to cry, and then what?
But you know, here's my point about media. How many of you have a TV in your home? What does the TV do? Even if it's on the educational channel, or what's the thing that our grandson likes?
Can't remember now.
Something on Nick Jr. that I've never heard of before, but everything is like,
Always something happens.
so, what does that say? What does that say, everybody? I don't know why we're upset with our children. How still are we? So where do they learn this behavior that something's always got to go around? From us. And until we can learn how to slow down and be still, then, you know, and we are on frenetic paces. We have crazy jobs, and you live in Houston and
Travel.
commute. You know, my husband and I were laughing. I've forgotten where we were. Oklahoma City, that was last week. And it took us 15 minutes to get anywhere, and people were talking about, oh, well, we have to travel a long time. And we're looking at them like, are you crazy? 15 minutes?
There's nowhere.
We live in Houston. We're thankful for 30 minutes. So when you look at what our lifestyle has become, it's a challenge for us to model the behavior we want our children to replicate. And I don't know why we would expect children to sit in church, whether they're those wonderful chairs or comfortable pews, when I've been in too many churches where I see adults wandering in and out. Why do you expect little kids to sit still?
I would like to also suggest, because what you're saying is the reality of a lot of parents who are two income families who have schedules that are not always conducive to being at the same place, same time, everyone sitting down together. And one of those things that has to happen is that simply a decision has to be made within your home when is the most likely time. And sometimes it's around meals. Sometimes you have maybe one meal in a day that a family actually will sit down for any length of time. And then you've got to measure that against the age of your child, the developmental ability. To spend any time talking, period. That just is not realistic. So worship for a child between the ages of 2 and 5 will be totally different when you get up to a child who's somewhere between 7 and 9 or 10 or 11.
And don't have children of all those age groups.
Yeah, in one place.
Which is possible.
Yeah, and a lot of times we do that in church. We have a spread within our, because we don't always have enough people to help the children to divide them off into subgroups and to make the activities fit the developmental ability of the child. See? So don't hurt yourself and beat up on yourselves as parents when things don't fall into memories that you have. Your memories are selective of what you were like as children, at what stage, at what time. See? I would dare say that I can't remember worships before I was 4 to 5 years old, period. But I know my parents had worship, but I don't remember them. See? So what does that mean? Does it mean that you give up on your child? No, it's not that you're giving up or that you're hurting your child by not doing things a certain way. You have to look at this and also look at their faith concepts and what they can believe, what they can do, what they can catch at those ages. And go ahead. And I was just thinking that he was saying the same thing about his child. Church service is not planned for children. Church services are not planned for children. They're planned for adults.
Only some adults.
And certain adults, certain types of adults.
No, because it does depend upon how we learn and how we process. And everybody does not process the same way.
How do you balance that? Because let me go from a point. We have the same experience, and we do the worship every night. And before we were like, oh my, it's so difficult, so hard, but we continue doing it. And one day, for some reason, we couldn't do it. And my oldest brother said, are we going to do the worship service? So, she got it. I mean, she did it. And they have their own ways of learning and listening. They're like multitasking. Like, for example, today, she's 6. She was sitting down there. She was drawing with her friend next to it, Isaac, and they were talking, but at the same time she was listening. Why? Because she asked me when Wilma was singing, she said, what is her name? I said, Wilma. I said, but that was not the name that he said before. I said, Gomer.
Gopher.
Yeah. And then she was asking me questions about the sermon. All kind of questions. Like, was God really talking to him? And so I was like, yeah, I was answering the question, but she was listening. And I was, all the time I was like, but she was listening. So they have their own way of interacting. But it's a good point. How can we balance the worship service in church? Because, okay, our main purpose are the adults and everybody. How about the children? Are we helping them to grow that, relationship with God? I know that they have their own classes, but sometimes because of us, the adults, they don't come on time. So they only have like 15 or 20 minutes. And it's a battle because they come to church stressed out. Because it's late. And then the traffic, and they get all that. And then they come to church late, and they sit down there listening to an adult talking something that I don't understand. And then we want them to be the model. And I know that we have to balance what we do in the house, but what are we doing as a church to help them?
Well, I think that this is where family ministries shows up. Because
And children's ministries.
yes, family ministries is probably, well, as I perceive of it, is the hub to make your church aware who is your church.
Yeah.
You need to know who it is that you're serving, because if you're doing something because we've always done it that way, organizationally, they tell you those are the words of a dying organization. So we have to look at who we're ministering to, first of all, and then realize that we can't be all things to all people, but everybody ought to go away with something. And so that becomes the challenge. And I think I'm in a position to say this, I'm a third generation Adventist, and I'm a PK, and I've been married to a preacher for more than half of my life. I think that sometimes people who have been around the church for the longest period of time feel that that gives them entitlement to have what they want, that they're comfortable with. And if we look at churches that are growing around us and wonder why we can't do what they do, part of it is because they have learned if they want to grow, they have to get family units and they have to get young families. So you do what works for young families. On their Wednesday night, they don't have a traditional prayer meeting where we sing hymns, have testimonies, have someone preach and go home. They will do activities that are family oriented. They start at 5:30 and say, come eat dinner. Because they know people work. And they know if you go home, you're not coming back. And then they do all of the activities that involve families during that time period, because last time I checked, gas is $3.50 a gallon.
Yeah.
Hallelujah, you can find it for $3.50. So, when we start looking at who we're ministering to, that's half of it. And then we have to realize that everybody doesn't learn the same way, and that's okay. See, unity does not mean uniformity. And I've been here long enough to know that even though the majority of you came from the Philippines, you didn't all come from the same place in the Philippines. And you don't all speak the same dialect. And that's okay. And then you add the mix of everybody else. You've got to find out who is it you're ministering to. And we've got to tell parents what a lady told me. And I can't leave here today without telling you parents this. She told me one Sabbath when I thought, okay, this is the last Sabbath I'm coming to church with his children. She came up to me after church. She put her arms around me and she said, baby, you'll get through this. You just won't look the same when it's over. She was right. But I needed to hear those words. I did get through it, and I didn't kill anybody's children either.
We're hopeful that what we passed out to you will help you to put a handle on your children, because within those categories, none of them are hard and fast. as far as age or developmental stages, as far as when they happen. Every child is different in your house when they get to that age, and they'll do certain things at certain times, and others will follow after them and won't do it the exact same way at the same time. But you have to make decisions in your home about what happens in your home, and if God is in the center of it, then we have no right to come into your house and tell you what you can and cannot do.
That's the boundary.
That's the boundary, that sacred circle. You must do what you and God agree to do about family and children. However, when it comes to the church, then you have to be a voice for your family at church. And you have to let the church know what fits and what doesn't fit. You can't balance church service in one room. There's no balance. You can forget that. It doesn't happen. But what you can do is to begin a dialogue on how you can serve partnerships with families and parents who want to see the faith development of their children. And it might mean that you'll have a pull-out service for children of certain ages.
Or you could have a pull-out service for families with children of certain ages, because oftentimes what happens, sorry for jumping in, Pastor.
I'll finish when you get through.
Oftentimes what happens is moms wind up taking children out, and they don't get to do their spiritual development either. So that all has to be considered.
Yeah. But there's some people who can rotate in the children's ministries to be in charge of children's church instead of just having a story time at church. There can be a church developed for children with leaders who rotate in and out so they don't miss all the services all the time as adults. And sometimes families go back there and sit and be a part of that service. Sometimes they're in here, but there's a rotation. So everybody does not always miss everything because they're serving the needs of children and families. But you have to find out what your capabilities are to have that. How many people you can divide among you, but as you grow, you'll find greater and greater capacity of having adults who are gifted with children. You don't send adults back there who are going to be the hammer on children. They must have a gift for ministry to children that families can trust with children with enough help that it becomes ministry and not a babysitting conflict arena.
And you all are blessed because you're talking about a new sanctuary, and I don't know if the plans are written in cement, but maybe considering what your church demographic needs are, you need to look at your plan in conjunction, because unfortunately, oftentimes children, especially the little ones, are put back in a corner in the dark somewhere, and they get what's left or not at all. And if your ministry is to sustain and form and retain, then maybe that ought to be a consideration.
I want to affirm just both the men who spoke up, as well as you, Jenny, because what you're saying is real and from your heart. Unfortunately, or fortunately, children are the product of you, your nurture and your genetics. So sometimes it's a fight and battle because you see yourself and your children and you don't know what to do about it. But God overrules, okay? Just stay faithful and stay concerned and stay connected, and God will give you opportunities for your child to grow and develop and have a faith walk. And your illustration of your child today in asking questions shows a certain acuity on her part. Every child can't do that at that age. They can't multitask, ask meaningful questions, and still do something else quietly, but have a little conversation. I'm happy for you as parents that you're willing to engage your child and not tell them just be quiet. Because when questions come, you need to ask them as they come. Because if they are not responded to, they'll stop asking and get disinterested. So that's a good illustration, parents, for all of us. If your children are not engaged, then maybe you're expecting too much or more than they are capable of at their developmental stage. Maybe some tasks need to be completed before they can be at a stage where you can have a meaningful worship, Jenny.
Yeah, because for example, last night, and this is, but to me it's acceptable. Like she's the 107 our time with it. But like last night, our worship was just singing, and then I said, okay, it's time to pray. So I mean, she's so concerned about the lesson, but you got a 2-year-old running around. She loves to sing.
What's in the song?
Everything
Everything is in the song.
They decided the song.
That's right.
Let me, it's one of the, when my children were small, 1 quarter, I don't even think they did it for the whole year, 1 quarter, all the Sabbath school lessons were set to music.
The memory verse.
The memory verse, that's correct. We learned every memory verse, and we sang it at home. Those are the verses. My children have told me now that they're adults. They still remember those, and they remember the song that went with them.
And the verses. They connected it.
Right.
And I think that that's, well, they've changed the Sabbath school lessons since my children were.
We didn't have Grace Links.
No, we didn't have Grace Links. Grace Links is, and it was time to change them. I mean, these were the Sabbath school lessons that they started a long time ago. But
Picture rolls.
But there is nothing wrong with learning songs, because my pet peeve is that we stand on Sabbath, we sing hymns, and we just go through the motion. We have no clue as to the words we are singing. And I want to say something today that impressed me. During praise service, people participated far more when the songs were moved to a language you dream in.
It's closer to your house.
Yes, yes. And it was very evident to me, who couldn't do all of that, but then I began to realize everybody was into it when it moved to a language that was the dream language. Because that is where we are located. And if we think about that, why do you think commercials have jingles?
In music. That's right.
So if that works for your children, then praise the Lord. I don't think anybody has to apologize for what's working.
That's right.
Just know that worship at your house isn't going to look like worship at their house.
Right.
But that's okay.
Right.
And the one thing I want to share, Jenny, because I know from where you all come, okay? You show it in your commitment and in your faith walk. You must look at this more carefully, okay? And don't be anxious and eager to over-teach. It's the experience more than it is about facts. The experience of believing in God, believing in Jesus. Because at every stage of development, and I want you to listen to this carefully, parents. At every stage of development, you need to have a new commitment for Jesus Christ. Because at 5